let me introduce Professor Jaatinen. So he is in the School of Chemistry and Physics here at QUT. As you can see, more than 70 publications. That's as many as I counted anyway. So after completing his PhD in laser physics, he was a senior research scientist for the CSIRO. Then he came to QUT, which was great, in 2002, if I'm correct. And you can see his research field there. And we're just going to talk to him today about his experiences of publishing, because as you can see, very prolific. Therefore, he should have some really excellent insights for us. Now, what I am going to do, if I can find my, oh, there it is. I'm just going to stop our share and say, welcome along, Professor Jaatinen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kerry. Hopefully you can hear me. Thanks for the very glowing introduction. I don't know if that's that deserved, but anyway, I hope I can answer some questions and give some insight about this whole idea of trying to write research papers.
That's exactly right. Thank you. So what we sort of wanted to start about today was your experiences of what you found that journals generally expect in an article, and perhaps some common feedback that you've received during your experiences with getting published, and potentially how also you deal with rejection. So I know I've said 3 things there. So let's start with the expectations of of journals. What would you give advice for everyone here today?
Yeah, I guess like that's a very broad question, I think, about expectations from journals, and it really would depend a bit on the journal, particular journal that you're targeting. And I think that's an important thing to note, is you really do need to target your work towards a specific or a range of journals, because if the work that you're presenting doesn't fit into the scope, then they'll reject it outright, and it's wasting your time and everyone else's time. So you really got to look into what the scope of the journal is. If you've got colleagues that are working in that space, or your supervisor has published in that space before, seek their advice as to what range of journals they think is appropriate for that particular bit of work. So really don't just base your decision on simple things like, is it a Q1 journal? Is it a top ranked journal in that space? You've really got to look at the target audience, what the work is about, and is that journal the fit and proper place to present that work in. With regards to expectations in general, of course, what you're presenting has to be new. It has to be original, unless it's a review article, of course. But if it's an original contribution, you have to be really highlighting what it is that's new, original, and what impact it has about the work that you're putting in there.
Awesome, that's really good. So we did that in week 4. We spent a lot of activities around figuring out what was going to be the best journal to target. So yeah, really, and it does seem a little bit counterintuitive, doesn't it, to have done that so early in the 12 weeks. But exactly as you said, if you know the scope and you can then write your article to how they expect with their author guidelines as well. Have you tended to submit to the similar journals, or have you got a whole range that you go to?
I guess that depends a bit on your field. You may find that the area that you're working is pretty narrow, in terms of there's only a limited number of people researching in that space. And as a result, there's fewer journals that cater for your needs. So it depends a bit on your field. If I use my own as an example, I work in optical physics. And so if I'm talking about a technique that we've developed in that space, a research technique, then there's probably 5 or 6 go-tos that I would have, that I have good experience with. And I would probably look at them. I generally would steer away from going to the same journal every time, because then it becomes a little bit like you're not broadening the reach of your work, And the other thing to think about is also the impact of the work. Is the stuff that you're presenting, of really strong interest to people like yourself, professionals in that space, If so, you probably want a targeted journal. But if it's more general, the implications, the impact of your work are more broadly accessible to the community and the like, then you probably want to target a more broader journal, perhaps a nature paper, which is, you know, a fairly high thing to aim for, but some work that we do at QUT does belong in journals like Nature and Science and other examples like that.
Great. That's good advice. So when you get feedback from reviewers for an article that you've submitted, do you find that the advice, do you tend to agree with it and then use that to improve the article, or would you potentially think, okay, maybe I need to submit to another one instead? Sort of, what's your experiences with the reviews and also, I guess, rejection? Let's call it that. Rejection of your paper, not of you.
That's it, and that's a very important point to make.
Yes.
Firstly, when you get that criticism come back, your immediate reaction is, that is all wrong. They don't see the brilliance of my work. What are they thinking? Are they reading the same paper I submitted? And once that subsides, then you can look at it a bit more rationally and calmly. And let me reassure all of you out there that that will be your gut reaction in most cases. How could they dare say that about my work? It's the best thing ever, you know, and that's a normal reaction. I still have that. And at times I've had to have my colleagues, my co-authors, rein me back from tearing strips off the editor for allowing somebody to comment on my work in that way, you know. So there is passion there because it's a creation of yours that you put out there for people's view, and it hurts a bit. It does hurt a bit. You've got to accept that will be the case. But then once the passion dies away, the emotion dies away, if you look closely at what's being said, often you will grudgingly agree. You will go, it's not as clear as I thought it was. That's why they can't see the original contribution there, because it's buried in all this other stuff. And all they're really asking me to do is to pull it out and show them clearly what is new about this compared to other things. And that's the other thing to take note about reviewers. They are like you. They want to get their work published. They are also, experience the same highs and lows that you will feel. And they genuinely will want to help you. They will want to get your work across the line if it deserves to get across the line. So they're really there to help you. And I guess, yeah, there will be emotion there because it's your creation, and that, stings a bit when you get some comments that aren't, you don't really necessarily think are correct, but then if you let the passion go away, you'll find that perhaps there is something in there to look at.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. So I usually recommend, even getting feedback from anybody really, supervisors as well, is maybe read it, then close the laptop or the computer, walk away,
Yep.
Walk away for a day and just let it all out, and then come back with a clear mind and then go from there.
Well, that's exactly right, Kerry. And I had a recent experience maybe a year ago where I and a HDR, we were co-authors on the same work. He was lead author. He put something, submitted something to a journal. It came back and they rejected it. And we at first thought didn't agree with that. And after inquiring as to what the problem was, it was clear that it wasn't going to get into that journal. So we resubmitted it as was. It's the only time I've really ever done that.
Resubmitted to another journal.
Yeah. And the same thing. So then when we, put that down for a little while, we had to think. We came back to it with fresh eyes. They were correct. Like I said, it wasn't clear. The comments were, well, what's different between this and this other work? And the next journal, the feedback that came back was along the lines of, this lacks clarity, And then once we put it away, had a chance to sort of think about other things and then come back to it, they were correct. And then we addressed those comments, submitted it again to the second journal, and they accepted it.
Yeah, that's great. So perseverance.
Yeah, definitely.
We've been talking about a lot as well, and just staying motivated with that passion that you have,
Yeah.
and the goals to be
I think writing research papers in particular is how you grow resilience, you know, and we have to apply for many things as researchers, including funding and getting our papers published. And to do that successfully requires a high degree of resilience. And as much as it can sometimes sting, it's a good lesson to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. And it will make the paper better in the long run, you know, that it's all part of that feedback process, isn't it? So
That's right.
You talked about collaborating. And I said at the beginning, you've got more than 70 papers, probably up near the 100. Most of those are part of a research team, aren't they?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's very true. I've got maybe 20 odd, maybe it's a bit, I don't remember the number, where I was single author. Yeah. And that generally happens earlier in your career as an early career researcher or as a HDR. But then as your career progresses, you generally start to work in bigger and bigger teams, and the publications represent that through the team authorship, if you like. And again, I point out that just because you're part of a team doesn't mean your name goes on the paper. That's not how it works. You have to actually contribute something to the work. But yes, they are collaborations, and you'll find, again, as you progress, that those collaborations become more and more extensive. So as a high degree researcher, you probably collaborate with your supervisors and a few others, you know, so it's a smaller team. But then as you progress, you'll find that you're working with researchers from other places and other individuals who also get to be part of that work.
Yeah, so another example of it will get easier. You know, the more experience that you have,
yeah,
you're learning how to write the journal articles and what you need to do, and then it won't just all be you having to do all of it. So just one sort of, yeah, you go.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, Kerry,
No.
but just going about the experience, one thing I was going to point out when I knew that you'd invited me to this session was that no one is born gifted to do this stuff. It is all about experience. It gets easier because you've got the experience. So it just takes time. You've got to be patient with yourself and with the process, and ultimately you gain the skills and you know what to do, and it becomes quicker and more straightforward because you've been through the hoops many, many times before. It's like muscle memory. You kind of get to that point.
Yeah, that's great. Just so one more question around the articles themselves. We were wondering, what's your bit that you like writing the most within the article? You know, is it the results and the discussion? Is that the bit, or do you like that final recommendations, or do you like the lit review?
I think it depends a little bit on how close I am to the work. So I actually nowadays, I'm typically not the lead author. I contribute, but I'm not the lead author. And but I recently wrote a paper where I was the lead author because I was very passionate about this particular bit of work. So in that case, I wrote a large part of pretty much most of the paper in terms of including results and conclusions and the like, with my co-authors contributing in patches here and there throughout. But to be honest, most of my work now is done with my research team. So we've got postdocs, we've got HDRs, and they're preparing the bulk of the paper. I guess where I can add some input into that for them is really in the abstract and introduction sections. And to many people, those parts seem to be, oh, well, I'll get to that later. That's not important, laying out the groundwork. But to me, they're really important parts of the paper because that's where you sell the paper. You have to establish what the problem is, why it's important, and how your work addresses that problem. And that's all done in the intro and the abstract. So those two bits to me are really, really important parts. And you could ask some of my HDRs and they'll probably agree in that I will labor over the edits on those sections of the paper quite a lot. And typically the HDRs that have done the experiments and they've come up with the concepts and have done the hard work, they will write the remaining part of the paper with my input through editing and the like. So that again is a bit of a progression as your research career develops down the path.
Yeah. Okay. That's really good. There's I agree. We want to hook the reader in, don't we? In the abstract and the introduction, most definitely.
Yeah.
All right, great. So another thing that I see that is challenging about writing about your research is that whole process of writing is invisible. You know, you can't say, right, first you do this, this, this. It's iterative, going backwards and forwards. So for you, your writing practices and getting your writing done, which everybody's struggling with procrastination, with distractions and all of those sorts of things, competing tasks that are important. Any advice on how to get your writing done?
Yeah, I think you've got to force yourself on occasion. You have to set yourself some time, and don't let yourself cancel that time to do it. You know, and sometimes you'll sit down there and you'll think, at the end of it, you'll think, oh, that half an hour was wasted. I got nothing out. But you were thinking that whole time, and you may have crossed up a whole bunch of dead ends that you will not explore the next time. So it is useful, even those times when nothing really appears on the paper that you think is concrete. The other thing I'd suggest is, when you do that, is don't get caught up in trying to make the sentence perfect. Just let the ideas flood out of you, and it can be gobbledygook. That's okay. You can tidy that up later, but let it come out while it's rushing out, because you'll find that it comes in fits and spurts like that. And then polish it up later. Don't go back when you're putting all that stuff down and fix up that first sentence because it didn't make sense or the grammar's not correct. Come back to that later. So do the polishing after all the ideas and thoughts have come out of your mind.
Awesome. Yep. That's what we'll be doing in the module as well. And near the end is we go back and do all the polishing. So, and one last question, that's one of my passions, is seeking feedback.
Yep.
You know, you've got your people that you're collaborating with. Is that a process that you find is easy, or is it, you know, because you are asking someone to take their time to give you feedback as well. So any advice around seeking feedback?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, in my experience as a supervisor, it's something that is really hard for HDRs at first to do. They really feel close to their work, and they're very reluctant to let other people in on it. And I think the earlier the better. And that doesn't mean just your supervisor. If you've got a research group, I'd circulate your drafts and things with them and offer to do the same service for them. The more feedback and eyes you have look over it, the better. You know, you'll pick up those problems earlier, so it's not up to the reviewer to point out something that should have been caught or captured a bit earlier on. So you've got to be brave. You've got to be brave. You've got to put it out there. And if you know, and mostly your colleagues around you, they care about you as well as value as a colleague. So they'll be gentle, much more gentler than a reviewer external that you don't know who they are will be. So I think it's a really good practice to be willing to take the risk of getting, you know, a bit of you know, criticism, which is designed to be positive, about your work from your colleagues that are close to you. I think that's not a bad way to go.
Good, thank you. All right, well, thank you so much for your time. I just wanted to see if there's anybody that wants to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Anybody out there, you want to pop into the chat or turn your mic on for a question?
I had my mic was on that whole time.
Yes, it was. I think we would have told you if it wasn't. No, it looks like everybody's just in awe right now and thinking, wow, I can't wait till that's me. And I'm so, you know, laid back about the whole thing.
Like I said, there's a lot.
It's hard work. Absolutely.
It is hard work. Be persistent, be brave, and you know, you'll get there. You will get there. Just trust in yourself.
Eric has asked, first drafts, how soon should we share it? As soon as possible.
I think that as soon as you think there's enough for somebody else to make sense of it. So I guess with some of the advice I've given to, you know, the HDRs I've worked with, is you don't need to flesh out the intro. You don't need to flesh out all of that stuff. Put your results down. And so just recently, one of my HDRs came to me and gave me 2 pages there's some graphs and some dot point summaries. And I said, there's your thesis. Just flesh it out. That's a thesis right there. So it doesn't have to be too much, but it has to tell a compelling story. So if there's enough to go on, it could be really brief. So I would focus on that results bit. What have you found? And what does the data, how does the data support that? Give that to somebody with a few words around that and say, what do you think? How's that sound to you? And then it grows from there.
Yeah, that's really good advice. That's what we're working on at the moment, is the data and the interpretation. We've just got one more question here. Is there more chance of getting published with co-authors as opposed to a single author? What would you think?
In my experience, it doesn't matter. The work stands for itself. I'll be honest with you. When I get asked to review, I don't even look at the author's names. I don't even look. I just look at what they're telling me. And then it's later I go back and go, oh, I wonder where they're from, you know, and I wonder who's on that paper. Because to be honest, it should be that way. That is the way that review should happen. It shouldn't depend on who that person is, who they work with, because that's sort of like that old boys network that we're trying to get away from. So I think the work should stand on its own legs, without needing to look and consider who the authors are.
Yeah, I think the idea of collaborating means there's just a little bit less work to do, I suppose, but you know, because everybody's contributing to the writing and the thinking around it. But yeah, it shouldn't really matter.
Kerry, I just noticed in the chat there was a question about co-authors adding them late. I think that's a really good question in that authorship is one of the most sensitive topics that any researcher will face throughout their career, at any point in their career. And to me, the way to deal with that is to have those conversations on day one. So if you've just started a PhD or a master's, when you get into the office with your supervisory team, you need to have that discussion then and there. How does authorship work within this group? You know, is there an expectation that everyone gets put on even if they do no work? And, you know, and that's not, in my view, a correct approach, because we do have guidelines, which, Kerry, I'm sure you've gone through with the group. But you need to understand what's their view on that, because I have had to deal with situations, not within my own team, but as a director of research training for a faculty, where I've had to go and intervene when there's been a dispute about authorship between a HDR and a supervisor. And that's really messy, and it shouldn't have got to that. And I think you really want to iron out those things, you know, really early on. And if you're working in an extended collaboration where you don't, you know, like there's new people coming in from elsewhere, that very first draft that you circulate, put the authors down in the order you think is fit, day one, because don't leave that bit vacant until the very end. Otherwise, there could be things to resolve just prior to the paper being submitted. You know?
Yeah.
So have that out there really early so that a discussion can take place if there are going to be any problems. They emerge right at day one, and you can really nip them in the bud really early.
Yeah, that's really good advice. For those of you who are thinking back, did we touch on this? We did really early on in week 1, very briefly. And the idea was that universities will have those sorts of guidelines on authorship. So double check with whichever university you're in, and QT definitely has all that information as well. Lee Jun has a really good question. How do you generate brilliant ideas and turn them into fruitful arguments that are suitable for publishable papers? How do you get those brilliant ideas down on paper?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? Right. So I guess this is why we collaborate. Okay. Ideas do come from having conversations with people. Some of the best ideas that have emerged in my experience, where I've been part of an authorship team, have come from the people I work with, and in particular the HDRs that I've worked with. So I've had some really exceptional experiences where we've done some really good research, and the idea came from the HDR. And so that's something important to note, is that don't sit back and wait for somebody in the team to suggest, how about we do this? I mean, that happens sometimes, but if you've got ideas, offer them in your meeting and say, what do you think about this? Is this going to add something new or something we didn't think of before? Have those conversations, because especially when you first start, you can be a little bit reluctant to bring those ideas forth. There's no such thing as a bad idea. You've probably heard that many times, or a dumb comment. Just throw it out there. Just, that's what I mean. Be brave and, you know, be resilient, be persistent with that.
Yeah, that's good advice for sure. Well, anybody else got a question? I think Anna. Oh, you're on mute. Oh, there you go.
Thank you. Hi, Zach. I actually prefer to talk rather than type my question. Actually, I just thought of something as you were talking about generating ideas. One of the modules I'm teaching actually next semester is on collaboration and communication in research. And what I find is a number of the students kind of think about, you know, some of them say, I prefer to work on my own. I don't, you know, and it's almost like they see the idea of collaborating with other teams, whether it's multidisciplinary, you know, or international level, whatever it is. And I've just found your comment just then extremely useful. I wonder if you could just, how do you help students personally, if you do, kind of overcome some of these apprehensions about working with others, and whether it's being overprotective about their, you know, their ideas, or whether it's, you know, not sure how they're going to get on, you know, all those sorts of issues. I mean, I deal with it to, you know, as best I can, but I'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Anna. That's a very, you know, deep question. And I guess, you know, at the heart of that, research is a very personal journey experience, in that people have different approaches to them, and there's no one single way. But I do agree that through collaboration, much more significant research can be done. I guess if you want to watch a visual, funny example of this, watch The Big Bang Theory and watch the leader character grow from being someone who is deeply personal about their own research, and then actually collaborating with people, even if that person was his wife or friend, you know. So I think ultimately, yes, you're absolutely right. I think collaboration leads to bigger and better outcomes, but that doesn't mean that own, you know, research done by that one individual by themselves is less significant. I think for some, it's a growth experience. They've got to grow from that, and then when they're comfortable, reach out for those collaborative experiences. But you know, you've got to think beyond the paper. You've got to think beyond of what you're currently doing. Ultimately, people will want to develop their careers. It's very hard to develop a career when you're just working by yourself, because, you know, you're not making contacts, you're not reaching out, and people don't get to know you as well. So it's through those collaborations that people get to know who you are, especially when you're trying to create a presence of being an authority in the field. So
yeah, because I guess, you know, one of the areas we look at is transdisciplinary research, and that obviously is working with a lot of others. No, you've given me some good ideas to add to my revisions. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Happy to help.
Thanks, Anna. All right, well, we might let you go. Thank you so much, Esa, for coming along. And it's been through the chat. Yeah, we've got everybody saying many thanks.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for the invitation. It's been a pleasure to be here. And if there are further questions, I'm happy to, you know, if they come in the chat, I can try and address them.
There's just
later on.
Two that quick. I know you do have to go. How do you help your HDRs choose their journals?
Yep.
Yeah, we'll just go with that one.
Yeah. Okay. So again, the first thing we have to look at is the scope of the work. Is this a broad piece of work that applies to more than people interested in optical physics? Does it have implications such as, an example of that would be, we create sensor systems. Can we detect pollutants in the environment? If we can do that, and if that's a big thing, a big part of that research, then we would look for a broader journal that deals with that, or that caters for those people interested in things that can help environmental problems. You know, if it's more about let's create a laser system, that's generally more of interest to a much narrower group of people. So then I would steer the HDR towards those more focused journals And often I would be asked by them, well, what journals do you think then? I'd go, well, to me, these are the ones that seem most relevant, but don't just go with that. Have a look, go online, go check out what else is out there that caters for that particular style of work. And that does mean going out and looking through the scope of those different journals and understanding what that journal is about.
Yeah, good advice. All right. Well, thank you again for coming, and we'll let you go.
Okay, thanks, Kerry.
Thanks. See
Bye
you.
all.
Bye.